All right, how about this for an intro? And since you don't edit my intros, you just make me look like an idiot. I heard that on the last episode. Thanks there, Dinger. But so this week on Gravel, I'm just gonna read my notes from the show. We talk about Delta Marsh, Delta, my dog, who died, who's now part of Delta Marsh, and then frankly, we spent a great deal of time about how to kill your dog.
Oh,
It's not a happy episode, but let's face it, life sometimes on gravel isn't all roses.
no kidding.
Well, hello, gang. Welcome to the 10th episode of On Gravel. This is Andrew McKean. What's going on, fellas?
10 episodes. Are we really going to do this thing?
I think it's happening.
10 episodes. I challenge one person to comment somewhere that they've heard all 10. That would be a miracle.
So I did get a little feedback. This is from my friend Chris Johnsrud, who we anticipate will be a guest. This is my knife maker, diesel mechanic, schooling friend. He said, would you guys quit self-deprecating you have more than 2 listeners?
Well, I want to point out that a lot of times when Eric talks about our listener, he would allege that we only have one. And I think he thinks it's only his dad. So as he's recording every episode, what I picture is that he's picturing talking so that he knows his dad overhears us.
My dad's on the way down from Minnesota to see me today to build a fence. So that's what I'm going to do all afternoon. How about that? Beat that,
That
fellas.
sounds like a euphemism.
Building a fence.
Given the political environment we have in this country, and since this episode will probably be running just before the election, we need to build bridges and not fences.
I'm gonna challenge what is and isn't politically correct right now, but my neighbors are Hispanic. Do or do not ask them to pay for the fence.
Well, what is it?
Whoa.
What does it matter what they're if they're Hispanic? What's their
Wow.
nationality and ethnicity have to do with that?
Well, isn't Donald Trump supposed to be building a fence that the Mexican government is going to pay for?
Oh, man, I didn't see that connection. Okay, I feel better about the
Oh.
comment now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's stay away from racial humor in general. I think is a good rule of thumb there, Dinger.
All right. Fair
But
enough.
but no, I think maybe you want to talk to them about it because if they see separating themselves from you as a benefit, then they might be willing to pay for it.
Touche.
Look, I hate to bring in sort of Western wisdom to this discussion, but there is a whole custom about fencing. So which way do the staples face, Dinger?
Oh, this is not a barbed wire fence. This is a 4-foot chain link fence.
Still, I'm guessing the fasteners face your property. It's your fence. You pay for it.
Yes.
End of story.
Yes. Correct. We're paying for it. It doesn't touch their yard. I was just being, belligerent.
So since Andrew is kind of our literary guy, was it Robert Frost that had the poem that good fences make good neighbors?
That's not Robert Frost. I think it was Robert Service. And he probably had some sort of Northwoods sort of Alaskan survival yarn in there too.
Okay, so 2 roads diverged in the woods and I took the one less traveled. That's Frost, right?
No, that would be Adlai Stevenson, who froze to death inside a moose carcass.
I'm pretty sure Adlai Stevenson was a vice president.
Okay, you got me. Yes, that's Robert Frost.
Okay. So since we're on episode number 10, it reminds me of an interesting story that I picked up this week. Do you know why Delta Marsh, the famous duck hunting location up on the southern shore of Lake Manitoba, is called Delta Marsh?
I've always wondered this. I figured it was the delta of a big river.
That's what I always thought too. Because rivers are flowing north up there, and they're flowing into those lakes up there. But no, it was the 4th stop out of Winnipeg, heading west out of Winnipeg. The 4th stop was at Delta Marsh. So it was the 4th stop was Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, or maybe it was Alpha Beta, Gamma, Delta. I don't know if they were doing Greek or military designations. It was a railroad. It's probably military, but so the fourth stop along the line was Delta, and so they called it the Delta Marsh because that was his fourth stop.
So it almost, I mean, a little farther down the line, it could have been Omega Marsh.
It could have been. I think you start getting up out of the river valley or this is that whole area up there is all in the old glacial Lake Agassiz lake bed. So it's pretty fascinating. There's a lot of marshes, but I got to tell you, so I got to visit Delta Marsh this week. I was up there, stayed in a cabin that Aldo Leopold has stayed in. So Al Hochbaum, way back when, was a student of Aldo Leopold's, and he was one of the guys that did a lot of the work up at Delta Marsh. And this whole property up there at one time was owned by James Ford Bell, and he was the founder of General Mills, and he was the founder of the Delta Waterfall organization. Well, that whole property, for the most part, is now owned by Delta Waterfall, and they brought me up there to go duck hunting for a couple of days. It was a real bucket list for me because I have always wanted to hunt that location, and I've always wanted to kill a canvasback on Delta Marsh, and I accomplished that a couple days ago. So check off another box for me because that was something I had been aspiring to do. I bet for 20 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's sacred ground for sure.
It's pretty cool. So Delta Marsh is on the south shore of Lake Manitoba. Lake Manitoba is a 100-mile lake, and I guess the deepest spot on it's 22 feet. It's just immense. It's pretty cool. We got some winter, so it snowed one day and it was blowing sideways. Just the kind of stuff you expect to have to put up with to kill a canvasback, and that's what we did. But this trip was kind of a two-part story for me. I've mentioned her before, but my last dog, who just passed away this last year, was named Delta, and I named her after Delta Waterfall. But I had always had this aspiration that she and I would go up and hunt Delta Marsh. And when she died last February, uh, that dream had died. Well, for the last couple of years, she wouldn't have been able to handle the marsh. It takes an athletic dog to put up with the loon shit and the muck that's up there, But we had some good dogs with us, and we had a good hunt. But I was able to bring my dog's ashes up. I could not find anything in Canadian customs regulations that said I was not allowed to bring the ashes of a dead dog with me. And when I stopped at the border, they asked me a series of questions about what I was bringing in, and I said, yes, I have a gun, yes, I have ammo, no, I don't have any alcohol, no, I don't have any tobacco. And I kept waiting for do you have any dead dogs? And they didn't ask that, so I didn't tell them. I brought her up, and even though she and I had never hunted there in the past, I interned a little bit of her ashes, not all of them. I've got a few more spots that we're going to spread her ashes in this fall, but there's a little part of her that is now part of Delta Marsh. So she gets to listen to the canvasbacks come wheeling in and things for the rest of the time. At least that's the romantic part of me that's thinking. So I'm gonna stop now because I'm gonna get choked up if I keep talking about it.
There's two things I think remarkable about that. One is that she's going to be pushing up some duckweed, which is pretty cool. The second is that you actually cremated your dog. And when you were telling me about this earlier, I guess I've heard of dog cremation in the past, but you had a pretty valid reason why you had remains of her a year after her death.
Well, I didn't plan for her to pass away. I'd always thought that, she passed away, that I'd bury her up at the farm in west central Minnesota. But when she died, it was February, and we had 3 feet of snow on the ground. And so I didn't honestly, I had no idea what to do with her when she passed away at the foot of my bed. In my bedroom. You know, not anytime she would have passed away, it wasn't going to be unexpected, but I wasn't planning for it. And so after it happened, we jumped on the internet and we found a place here in the Twin Cities that cremates dogs for a reasonable price, and brought her in, and it was actually a really good experience. I mean, any of us that have ever had to deal with undertakers and things for humans, they have that demeanor, that peaceful, calm, almost creepy demeanor. Has been my experience with most human undertakers. The guy there was, very respectful and understood, that we were going through a hard time, and we were crying like crazy, but we brought her in and we had her cremated. Took a couple hours. We came back and we picked up her remains, and she they had a nice maple box that she was enclosed in. Now, when I opened up that box, it was sealed shut. It was screwed shut on the bottom. I had to undo the screws to open it up, and then she was in basically a plastic Ziploc bag, just gray ashes, just like whenever you see on TV when they have or in movies when they have the funny experience with spreading someone's ashes. That's exactly what it looked like. And so I spread a little bit of ashes in the marsh, and she will go on and grow some sago pondweed and wild water celery and the kinds of things that those canvasbacks are eating up there, and that's part of it. But there's some real advantages. I mean, because when you've got a 75-pound dog, they're burying them is not the easiest thing in the world.
My dad died in 2009, and he was cremated. And one of the all of us kids we spread some of his ashes on our family farm in Missouri. But each of us kids took a little bit of my dad's remains, and he still is in a. We had milk cows when I was a kid, just two. But one of my jobs after school is I was the afternoon milker, and we'd milk, and then filter the milk into these galvanized pails with a little top on them, and that's always has been associated with the farm and my dad. And so the remains I have of my dad are in the milk pail. But he was a farmer, but he was pretty worldly and liked to travel in books, but didn't travel in person very, very much. So one of my tasks as a dutiful son is taking my dad to all the places he dreamed about going. So he's been to the Yukon, he's been to Bulgaria, he's been to New Zealand, he's been to Africa. So that's actually one of the great things about cremation, I think, is the ability to transport those remains through international borders.
Did you have to declare whenever you crossed any borders?
I declare he's with me, but I keep it to myself.
Okay, that's probably...
He doesn't require a passport.
So all this dog death reminds me, do you guys know what chemists do with their dog bones after they die?
What does a chemist do with their dog bones, Eric?
They bury them.
Since I'm channeling my dad, I will tell you his second favorite joke. I already told you guys one of them, I think, earlier in an episode. Three-legged dog walks into a bar. The whole place goes quiet. Everybody looks around, and the dog takes time to assess the situation and says, "I'm looking for the cuss what shot my paw."
Really love the accent your dog has. Your dog must have been born in the Old West.
You can almost hear the squeak of the saloon door there. Actually, kind of interesting. We talked in a previous show about my dog Willow. I think in our dichotomous question about the best Dakota, we talked about taking her to South Dakota. Bronson was with me. Willow ended up dying 2 Decembers ago, in a slough we have here on our place in Montana. And in some ways, she was 12 years old. She was getting pretty gimped up. In some ways, it kind of took away the decision that I was expecting to have to make of when is it time. It wasn't a happy thing. In fact, it was pretty dreadful as it all happened. You can read about it in the story called The Slough if you want to research it. It was Outdoor Life. But in some ways, it was a mercy because that decision was taken away from us. We didn't have to agonize over it the way a lot of dog owners do. As Bronson was talking about Delta, and then I have another friend who had just a young pup who had some sort of malady. I'm still not quite sure what it was, some genetic aberration, but it was not going to have a very fruitful or pleasant life. And they were faced with the decision with this pup at 5 months old, whether to end its life. And they ended up doing it. And my friend was agonizing over it because they took the dog to the vet in the classic way of, putting the dog to sleep or putting it down or whatever euphemism you want to bring to it. He felt like he was deprived the chance to have a more personal closure. And I asked him what that meant. And he said, well, I'm pretty familiar with death and dealing death as a hunter. And he said, I feel like I owed that dog killing it myself. So I challenged him on it a little bit. I said, could you really have done it? And he didn't even blink. He said, yeah, I could have done it. And I wished I had, because the clinical sort of order of removal of being at the vet, he said, just took all of the life out of the situation. So I've got a question for you guys. Could you kill your own dog?
Go ahead, Eric.
Thanks. I was going to sit this one out. That that might be the most morbid question ever asked, by the way. But it's really interesting. Like, what does any animal deserve? And so when you think about like an animal that your family loves, as you were asking the question, I was thinking about my kids, because especially Ray, our 7-year-old, her life begins and ends with that dog. She just, with all of her little heart, loves that dog. And so the thought of even being faced with that breaks my heart, and it gives me a lot more empathy, because Scout is our first dog. I have a lot more empathy for people and how they feel about their dogs. And we were talking before we hopped on the podcast about how Facebook's algorithm somehow must preference decedent dogs in their algorithm, because it seems like that happens all the time, that you see somebody's dog dying. And I'd often read them, but I couldn't feel it. And now that I have a dog of our own, I can feel it. And if I had to put it down, I guess, I remember, back on the farm, if you will, that's how you always did, is you shot the dog. I don't think I could, guys. I don't know. It's interesting because in a different way, we have squirrels in our backyard, and we trap them, and I bring them out to the country and I let them go. But I'll happily walk up to a squirrel in the country and shoot it and skin it. And I don't know what that is. It's like a little twitch I have as a hunter that, like, yes, as a hunter, we dole death. And sometimes as hunters, we even shy away from using the word killing. We say things like harvesting to sort of shield the fact that we're taking a life. But as an individual, my view on hunting and life and taking of life must be fairly nuanced. And I don't even know how to describe why I won't kill a squirrel we trap in our backyard, but I won't. And so the thought of taking an animal that we've loved and killing it, I don't know that I could do what a friend Aaron said that he could do. What about you, Bronson?
When I was a kid, our first dog, my dad had an Irish setter, and his name was Manny. And my dad took him out into the Sherburne National Wildlife Refuge when he was at the end of his life, and shot him and killed him. And he always told me he will never, ever, ever do that again unless he absolutely had to put a dog out of misery and he couldn't get to a vet, because it was such a hard experience for him. And my dad's grew up on farms, first generation. He's killed more animals than the plague, and that really tore him up. Now I've noticed that every subsequent dog he's had since Manny lived outside. Every dog after that has lived inside, and they keep getting more and more spoiled. And honestly, he's at the point now where he treats his dogs better than he ever treated me and my brother as children. So he's getting softer and softer as he goes on. But this was back when he was pretty hard on his dogs. They lived outside, and that he said he'd never do it again. So based on how my dad reacted, I don't think I ever will unless I absolutely have to. Now, uh, am I capable of it? Sure. So was Travis at the end of Old Yeller, but I mean, I think of how hard I bawled reading that book and watching that movie. What he had to go through, I don't. It's if I can have the vet deliver that shot of purple whatever it is, and I can be there, and it can happen quietly and painlessly. I think if that's an option on the table, I'm always going to take that. But as far as your Facebook experience, I have that same experience, but I also think as guys, especially, one of the only things that it's really acceptable in our macho outdoorsman community to really be emotional about, it's your dog. You're allowed to baby talk to your dog. You're allowed to do a lot, let them lick your face and all those things. And when your dog dies, when I eulogized Delta on Facebook, it was the longest Facebook post I'd ever made. I wrote her a eulogy and put it on Facebook, and it's also the one Facebook post I've ever made where I think just about every one of my Facebook friends, interacted with that post. I mean, it's dogs are one of the places where it's just socially acceptable to be really emotional. And so I think that's important for us that we have a place where we can be emotional like that. And I think that's part of why it seems so disproportionate when that we see so many dog stories, because people are so emotional about sharing those stories, and we all get it. Especially dog owners, we all get it. And we know what they're feeling, and we're just dreading that we know within the next decade we're going to be feeling it again with our own dogs.
It's almost some masochism in that, right? Like, honestly, the number one reason I hesitated to get a dog, even being an avid upland hunter, even being an allergic to dogs guy, is our kids are going to be leaving for college. Best case scenario with our lab, she lives until right about the time that we're empty nesters. I just, like, the thought of foretelling that sadness in my life, like, basically led me to hesitate getting a dog more than anything else. And I don't know why that is, but what do you think, Andrew? Could you do that?
Well, I have. But before I get to that story, a number of years ago, a bunch of my friends got together, and we used to get together every Thursday evening in my office and discuss just whatever was on our mind. And at one point, this topic was on our mind because my friend Kai had a dog who was at the end of their lives, and he wasn't sure what to do. And maybe it was the beer, and maybe it was the time of day, sun going down. We all made this pact that we would shoot each other's dogs and take away the burden of doing it ourselves, because we all, in kind of weepy admission, realized that we'd have a hard time doing it ourselves. The interesting thing about that admission is we all pictured muffing it. We all pictured somehow not having a clean, quick death that we have dispensed to other things when it came to our own dogs. And I think all of us kind of had this mental picture of a dog needing and deserving death, but us somehow messing it up. So anyway, we made this pact, and it was pretty serious. So Kai's dog was the first one up, And the interesting thing about it is the person who was appointed to do it couldn't do it. And it was kind of a real, I guess, a realization that it's a much harder thing in practice. Basically, he brought the dog back to Kai and said, I took it out and I tried to do it, but I'd hunted with that dog so many times, even though it wasn't my own, and I couldn't do it. So I think that's the reality of it. It's easy to talk about. When the time comes, I think it's a much harder process. But I told you I had some experience with it, and I'll try to keep it short. But when I was a senior in high school, some neighbors gave me a border collie for a graduation present. Now, the worst possible graduation present is a puppy.
Yes,
because you're going to leave it.
Absolutely.
You're going to leave, right? What's going to happen to that dog? Maybe a souped up Camaro is a worse graduation present, but I don't think so. I think it's a puppy. And so, I went to college, and this dog's name was Jake. Awesome dog. I mean, exhibited all of the things that make border collies so amazing. Just absolutely quick study, just enthusiastic, great athletic dog. Anyway, I went away to college, and my folks were left with kind of figuring out what to do with this dog. And we lived on a farm. He was pretty good, but my folks decided that they weren't able to give Jake the life that he wanted, and so they brought in two kind of adopted dogs. Just I can't remember where they got them. Well, one dog is a dog, two is a pair, and three is a pack. And what happened is, especially kind of this time of life, I was the last kid at home. There was nobody to really train and work with these dogs. They ended up killing our sheep. And my mom wasn't sure what was happening at the time. She'd kind of come in and call me in my dorm in college and say, there's another lamb dead. Its stomach was ripped out, but none of it was eaten. What's going on? It's like, God, it didn't sound like coyote. So I was trying to analyze what was happening from afar. Anyway, fall break, I end up going home because we're going to sort calves and sell them. And my dad needed help. And I was first day home from college, all fall. I look out the window and there's Jake leading his pack. And they sort out a lamb as I watch, and they take it down and they kill it. I said, well, Mom, there's what's going on with the sheep. And my dad was very matter of fact. He just said, you know what we got to do? Call your dog. And so I did. I knew exactly what he was talking about. Looking back on it, I think there were lots of other options, but at the time it was just the way it was. Like, we got a sheep killing dog. We have to kill it. So I called Jake, and he said, my dad said, do you want me to do it? And I said, no, I'll take care of Jake, but you take care of the other two. And so we did. We killed all three of those dogs in the front yard. It was pretty tough.
So
this is without question, guys, the heaviest topic in the history of On Gravel.
Well, I'm going to completely So remember the song that I think the Pirates of the Mississippi had called Feed Jake? So that's what started going through my mind.
Maybe it's a good time to change the topic. We talked last episode about kind of mentoring and how to bring people in. Dinger was talking about, or Bronson was talking about bringing a newcomer to the deer camp and kind of all the expectation that was with that. I think I mentioned that in my county here in Eastern Montana, we're trying to do a countywide mentoring project this fall with beginning hunters. And it's actually been really interesting. We were talking before we pushed record on this episode about, how do you get people to join you in the field? And this one's been interesting. Our next step is to use the Powderhook app and create what we call a camp and create basically a community within the infrastructure of the app to communicate all of the experiences. But we decided we would take the first step with a more traditional outreach. And so I wrote a news release and it went around statewide. And I think we have 6 people who responded to this. These are 6 beginning hunters who are interested in having a mentored experience that culminates in hopefully a successful hunt and venison for their families. The interesting thing about it, as I was telling Bronson and Dinger, is half of the people who responded to that news release don't have a cell phone or internet. And so some of the ways that we've thought about reaching out to these people through kind of new media might not work for everybody. It's going to be fascinating. We've got at least 2 middle-aged women, 1 middle-aged guy, and the rest are sort of more, there's a couple of 12 and 14-year-olds and then an 18 or 19-year-old. But it's going to be interesting. But just that outreach was interesting. I didn't expect to see people respond, via landline, frankly.
Crazy.
I'm just curious if you guys think that that's unusual, if that's kind of a function of rural Montana, or if we're missing people when we just try to find them through social media.
Well, the thing that comes to mind when you say that is both edifying in some ways and discouraging in some ways, in that somehow we've got to get the message out to the people listening to this podcast, to anybody who cares about hunting and wildlife in this country, that people in general approve by a wide margin of hunting. There's a very small minority of this country that would be considered anti-hunting. And the vast majority of them are an invite away from coming with you. I mean, we've cited the data a few times on this podcast, but the reason people aren't going hunting, there's all kinds of reasons, but the number one reason is you didn't invite them. And what's interesting is your press release served as an invite for some people who were past the age or are older than the demographic that would have a cell phone, meaning to me that those people have probably wanted to hunt their whole life. Think about that. If you're alive in this country and you have wanted to hunt your whole life, you're going to take a press release as an invite to go. Mm-hmm. Imagine if somebody sometime along the way had just said, hey, any interest in going with me? We're going Saturday. We've got room in the blind. And for some reason, all of this talk about the decline in hunting numbers has just caramelized in my mind around the concept of we just got to invite people. Yes, there are programs, and yes, there are really cool things like what your Highline Sportsman Group is doing, where you're really kind of going soup to nuts and really trying to give people the full training and experience as their mentor in the outdoors. But man, it doesn't have to be that hard for everybody. Like Andrew just gave an example of 3 out of the 6 people that responded that wanted to learn to hunt in his region, in his area of the country, had probably wanted to do that for many, many years, and just nobody had ever asked. So that's my take on it, Andrew, is that we have had a blight of asking our neighbors and our friends and our coworkers about it. And I'll give you one great example. One of my former coworkers at my old company moved to Chicago and began working for a great big ad agency in Chicago as a creative guy. And he flew home back to Nebraska every year to hunt deer, and would go on our pheasant trip up to South Dakota with me and my group of friends. And he told me the story after he'd been in Chicago for like 3 years, that he was flipping through the photos of the deer he'd shot with his bow at his desk when the guy whose cubicle was back to back to his, they sat 8 feet apart for 3 years. The guy flipped around and noticed that he was looking at a picture of a dead deer and said, "Oh my God, you're a hunter?" He had never mentioned it, and the guy across from him had never mentioned it, and both were avid hunters. And I think some of that is like the fear of being rejected in some cultures and in some areas of the country. But man, as hunters in this country, we enjoy overwhelming favor from people who both hunt and don't. And I think it's okay to talk about the fact that you love to hunt. And I think it's great to invite somebody that may push you out of your comfort zone or may think differently than you. They don't have to kill anything. They can shoot a photo, shoot the breeze for all I care. But you can absolutely invite somebody you work with, whether that's in downtown Chicago or in Western Montana. That's my take, Andrew.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Interestingly, as I was quizzing the people who responded to that news release, and I think you're exactly right. You nailed it. If the interest is that keen that they're responding to really as impersonal an invitation as you really can get, there's something there. There's a depth that we're not tapping. Interestingly, the people who responded and who I talked to, because I was basically building just profiles, just finding out what their experiences is, what their gear requirements are, and what their expectations are. At least two of the three people who I would say are kind of the non-traditional mentees said they hunted with their dads when they were little. One of the guys said he was a pheasant hunter, but he'd never gone deer hunting, and he never thought that this sort of opportunity would present itself. And he was flummoxed that, wow, there really is somebody who cares about this and wants me to participate. He was amazed. So our next step is we're matching all of the people who've expressed interest with people, these mentors in the Highline Sportsman group who want to take them. And that's going to be the next kind of interesting part of this process, is how we do that matchmaking.
I'm excited for you.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a great, it's a really good laboratory. We'll see how it goes.
Andrew, talk about, if you would, for a minute. I mean, you're a guy that, for the last 12 years, you worked for a corporation based, well, at least domestically based in Manhattan. And you've traveled the world. What is it about where you live, or the culture of the place you live, or the fact that it's a small town? Why is something like Highline Sportsman able to be a thing there, but feels so much harder in a place like, even, a place just a few times bigger like Lincoln?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think there's a couple of things that affect it. One, just the people who are involved in Highline Sportsman. This is a group, young, energetic, primarily young and primarily energetic people. We've gone through all of the other kind of conservation models and groups. We like working together so much. I think part of it has just its own momentum of just the personalities involved. We want to do something meaningful, and we decided that meaningful thing was not associated with the species, but associated with the place, local conservation. So I think that's one really magical part of it. It's if you can get a group of people together who kind of are pulling in the same direction, there's just no end to what you can do. But the second thing is, I think the appeal for this is actually pretty old-timey. This is the old Rod and Gun Club model that existed across America before really the species groups took the oxygen out of the room for all good reasons. We wanted to bring back specific species and habitats across different landscapes. But the original model for the citizen conservation group were these local-based rod and gun clubs. Sometimes there was a clubhouse, sometimes there was a shooting range. So I really think that we're going back in time. And I think it takes a smaller town to get that sense of community and community need. It's just easier to see those needs, I think, than in a larger town where there's a more diverse and complicated demographic.
It's absolutely, community is the key, because when you look at even where I live in the suburbs, I don't know most of my neighbors. And I've never felt a strong desire to know most of my neighbors. But growing up in a small town and growing up in rural places, not only did we know all our neighbors, we knew everything that was going on in the community, because there was a sense of community. And I think that's part of what we've lost. So as a society in the United States is a connection with people in our proximity. We've kind of become tribal. We associate with our Facebook friends because they're all like us. They all vote the same way we do, and they all believe the same things we do. And so you kind of tribalize. And before we started to become this way, we connected with people because they lived near us, and that was the only reason. They were neighbors, and so you were able to overlook some of the bigger, social, philosophical differences you might have, because we live in the same town, so I'm going to be nice to this person. And so he's a Democrat, I'm a Republican, but we both like to hunt and shoot, and we meet at the gun club, and we meet at the rod and gun club, for drinks on Friday. It maintained that sense of community, and I think that's harder to do in places like Lincoln or Minneapolis or anywhere else. And God forbid you're in New York City, my God, where neighbors are only to be yelled at, not to have a beer and a venison burger with. I think that's part of it. So I think sending out a press release and inviting people, that's a first step in creating a community. Saying that, I don't care about the other things. Here's something that we have a shared interest that we can do together. Welcome. Let's do this together. I think that's so the community aspect that's the underpinnings of building a mentoring model that's going to work.
I agree. I think there's a human desire, though, to have that sense of community and to know your neighbors, even though we, kind of create all this scar tissue and these distancing mechanisms. I really do believe, and maybe I'm a little optimistic this way, too optimistic, that no matter where you live, there is a human need for that. In our case, I think it's easy because we've got abundant game, and we've got abundant opportunities to recreate outdoors. And as you say, Bronson, the connective tissue is stronger or thinner. I don't know what's the right descriptor here, but I don't know. I think if people reach out more, I think they would find, just like Dinger's friend in Chicago, that there's more amenities and affinity for each other than there's not.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. And I think that plays right into the concept of inviting people, right? Is, the downside in inviting someone is you get told no. Like the upside is you get a new hunting buddy, or you get, a great example. The same guy, 1 year when we went to South Dakota, we teased the crap out of him because he didn't want to carry a gun. We teased him, and in retrospect, maybe we shouldn't, because he's an incredible photographer. And for one day, all he did was shoot photos. And we have, still to this day, just the best hunting photos, of anything before I joined the outdoor industry. The best photos I had of me and of anybody I know hunting, he took that day. And like, what an incredible gift to the hunt to have a guy along who didn't feel like hunting that day. The downside in inviting somebody that wants to take pictures is you get great pictures. Like that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Bronson, I'm just waiting for my invitation to Delta Marsh.
Well, so I've been sponsoring Delta Waterfall as an organization for over 10 years now, and I finally got my invitation for the first time. So if they are willing to bring me back and you're willing to do a story and get it published somewhere, I will make the case why Andrew McKean needs to join me next time. So, what are you doing in 2028?
Probably killing my dog.
Oh man! Oh,
I had to bring it back.
Oh,
well, there's probably something to be said about beating a dead horse. I'm not going to go there, but we've got a little bit of winter here. It's early October, and there's snow all over the ground in eastern Montana. And not to pull the oldest exit card out of my hat, but I'm going to go check the weather out.
Well, we can end it there. But don't you feel like we ought to send folks out with like a little pep in their step so that they don't cry for the next 3 hours after this episode? Surely,
all right, Eric, what you got?
Surely one of you has something funny to say.
No, I've been talking about dead dogs. I'm going to be down for the rest of the day.
No kidding. Listeners of episode number 10 are all like contemplating suicide right now. Sorry, everyone. Not really. What's fun about this is, and this is a testament to you two, I think, is some of these things are really hard to talk about, and so people don't. And one of the things I hope we explore over the coming however long we're doing the On Gravel podcast is I want On Gravel to be a place where we talk about stuff other people won't. So if this was our first step into that, so be it. Hopefully sometimes they're less sad and maybe more controversial or something. But I enjoyed it today, guys.
Well, me too. Just remember about the three-legged dogs in the saloon. I mean, come on, that's the pep in your step.
Who shot my paw?
Okay, gents. Until next time, keep it on gravel.